hello. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. It's lovely to have you here joining me today. I don't know if it's me. Of course, it's me. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to say what I'm going to say, but who gives a fuck about appropriate? Now, I'll tell you what it is. It is this thing when I read the news and I read of catastrophe, like for instance what's going on right now with the floods in Pakistan, or when the war broke out, the whole world was talking about Ukraine and Russia, whether it was an invasion or whether it was a political move or whatever those things they use to take away from the actual truth. And everyone's like, yeah, casualties. Of course, it's horrific. But the first thing that goes to my head, like especially now, the war seems like, oh, it's just another thing. Oh, just fucking up. These guys can't finish anything. They start going on and on. It seems like that's where we've reached with this particular Ukraine-Russia situation. But it's crazy how we can really normalize something which is so crazy at the beginning. In a few months, we're just like, yeah. Electricity bills gone up. But it's whenever there's something large scale, when there's a lot of death and destruction, my thought automatically, like right now, they were talking about the number of people who've been affected by the floods in Pakistan and a lot of the damage to life and property. But automatically my thought goes to the animals. Like, it's weird. I don't know. I'm not like a person who goes and rescues every stray dog or, kind of brings down every abandoned cat from the tree, or I'm not a very hands-on person, because it does take a lot of I think patience, and you need to be a little sensitive to because a lot of times if you see a dog that's injured, they are going to attack you because, not attack you out of like aggression, but they're kind of a wounded animal. Yeah. So I really respect the people who can go out there and help animals that have been injured, or all these situations where animals in cities are hurt. It's amazing what people can go do, while the other side you have people going and killing and hurting and intentionally fucking. You read stories of horrific things that people, men, boys, mainly men and boys, women not so much, girls not so much, but men and boys do to pets, and it's crazy. It just brings out the darkness in man, and mainly man, not women. I don't know, there are some psycho chicks as well who do that, but a lot of boys and men who basically can't express their frustration take it out on pets which can't fight back, and that's horrific. And I'm sorry to call myself a human being and a man who I'm not so much I'm apologizing for all men, but it's just ridiculous that this can be done. But every time you read these news stories, it's like, I think somewhere it said 1 million animals were killed by this flooding in Pakistan. And I mean, who's counting? First of all, it's livestock. They say livestock like as though it's packets of chickpeas. It's ridiculous. I don't know whether I'm just like this kind of sort of person who someone would call, oh, you're sitting in your privilege and you can't really understand how life is. But fuck all that. I don't know, more and more sensitive to this kind of, like, we have a lot of stray dogs on our streets, and of course a lot of people feed them. There's this thing like, oh, you have the dog lovers, or like, of course you have to feed them, they're alive, and they have people going and neutering them, and then you have people being attacked by them, because when these dogs form packs and become wild, and they hurt kids and they hurt people on bikes. And so there's no right in this, there's no wrong in this, and I don't open up a can of worms. No one cares about worms, it seems to be. But I don't know, man. It just feels like they're more and more now. Like, you can hear, and I don't know, is it right to put a human perspective on animals and their situation? Like when dogs fight, or when they're kind of going after a female, it just sounds horrific. It sounds like shit. You should be able to do something, but what do you do? What do you actually do? Do you go out there and separate a fight, and get bitten and get rabies? I don't know. It's fucked up, because you can sit and talk about it like what I'm doing now, but what is the realistic solution to whether it's stray dogs? And I was talking to someone who said, like, stray dogs, the stray dog population is some crazy number. Stray cats, especially these two, are a real threat to the wildlife because of maybe diseases, or maybe even because when wild dogs form these packs, they actually can hunt down leopards or lions. And I don't know the exact nature of this situation, but I've heard from someone, and apparently, I don't know, but the moment you talk about culling a stray dog population, it just sounds horrific, right? The way they do it. Apparently in Australia, they just go around fucking shooting kangaroos because they're a menace. So would it be okay to go around shooting stray dogs, or is it okay for people to ill-treat them? I don't think so. And I don't have the answer. I just don't know why I went down this space today. But I just feel we've lost the plot when it comes to, we in some way are responsible for the stray dogs, or dogs in general, going out of control. Kind of, because a lot of fucking idiots get their kids' dogs thinking, oh, wouldn't that be a cute birthday present? Then realize that little puppy is going to shit and poop and bark and going to teeth and have growing spurts, and going to become a dog that needs to sort of be fed, needs to be disciplined, needs to be loved, needs to be walked. And they don't realize that. And they're like, oh, fuck, this is not a Netflix subscription that I can just get rid of. And they fucking leave the dog on the road. And, these dogs are pets which don't know how to fend for themselves. Next thing they get, hit by a car, hit by a bike. And it's terribly sad. And I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm not saying I'm like the savior of all pets, but it just seems like we are the problem. So I don't know, maybe war is good. I don't know. The fuck, man. But yeah, it seems like there's a lot of chaos. But every so often, you hear of these, you hear the psychos in Canada going around stabbing people. It just seems like every day, and I keep bringing up this on the podcast, is every day we kind of outdo ourselves with, we need shock value, just like, oh, the ice bucket challenge, we just need another challenge. Every time there's, the app opens, it's like, ooh, that's what's new now. Which fuckhead has gone around doing what fuckhead shit? But clearly there are no limits to our fuckheadedness and our ability to go beyond our ability to surprise and shock and startle ourselves. And the depth of our depravity seems to have no bounds. But then we can be mindful, calm, breathe. We can have a sense of belonging, a community, inspiration, and an idea of being loving, compassionate human beings. Is there any sense in this? I don't know. People say look at the positive, right? People say look at the positive. And I suppose there's no other way if you want to remain sane. But I feel we live in a society where everyone wants to spout the right kind of shit, while doing the wrong kind of shit. Whether it's for themselves or for others. Yeah, people. Yeah, I have the Calm app. I read books by the Isha Foundation. I know what it is to be anxious and depressed. I know what it is to have a sense of identity and self-worth. And everyone seems to know it, including yours truly. But do we even understand what it means to be in this experience? I don't know. It's just it's so simple, maybe, just to kind of get by. Yet it seems like more and more distractions are the way we perceive simplicity, going from one thing to another without actually I don't know, because like being an animal is, that's it. You shit, you eat, you fuck, you sleep in any particular order, and you survive. Like I was thinking for like an animal, for like a bird, for a crow, for a pigeon, for a stray dog, for a stray cat, or for any animal which is not in your house or which is not being cared for, I think the ultimate motive is not to die that day, is to survive, if you call, just to not fucking get eaten or to not be taken out, poof, like an assassin killed. So they go about their day. We seem like the moment life is guaranteed or that day is guaranteed, we seem to fuck it up. Yeah. the moment we say, oh, you know what? Because you look at it, people who don't know where their next meal is coming, they seem to just fucking live in the moment. They're like, I don't know when my next meal is coming. I just have to survive. I just have to be here in the now. I have to know my hunger. I have to know what it is to be alive. And then you feel truly alive when you're about to die or not comfortable. Yeah. But the moment you're comfortable, you know, 3 meals a day, you know that, you know what, whatever, I'm going to work out, I have everything, I have money. And you say you're not in a comfort zone, you're comfortable and you know you're going to live through that day or that week. That's when you start fucking things up for yourself. That's when you start making life difficult. That's when you start adding more shit, because the shit that you which is most important, is taken for granted. And I feel that's something we need to maybe revisit. I think all of us, including me, maybe just have one day in a week starting that you don't know whether you're going to make it through the day. You don't know if you're going to get your next meal. You don't know if you're going to have the clothes on your back. You don't know if you're going to have any sense of security starting next week. So every Sunday, or maybe Friday, or maybe Saturday, say you're obliged, it's an obligatory, it's an obligatory go out, but you don't know whether you'll wake up on Sunday, or not. Most importantly, not even wake up. You have to basically live each Saturday like it's the last day you have what you have. Every Sunday is a reset, and you don't know what you're going to start with. That's pretty interesting. It might take away depression, anxiety, might take away all the shit that, which a lot of people do have genuinely, but a lot of people kind of hide behind because it's the easy thing not to be questioned for at work or at school or at university. You say, I'm anxious. Well, anxious is actually a good thing, because that's what you take to look within and see what needs to be addressed in your way of life, or your way of thinking, or the way in which you look at yourself, and maybe spend some time looking within as opposed to your fucking screen, you cunt. Sorry. But at the same time, I think this will genuinely help people look at what it really means to be alive, and to kind of actually look at what is the real issues, and separate it from the stuff that we add in as trivial distractions and disruptions, which we kind of then exaggerate, and then we make as a part of our identity, and then we kind of get people to recognize that and say, oh my God, you poor thing, what a tough experience it is, what a tough life it is. Let's celebrate you for the hero or the heroine that you are, and let's pat you on the back and give you another like, or give you another medal, or give you another award, or give you another platform to spill your heart out and talk about how amazingly difficult it has been being the victim that you are. And if this goes on, we're just going to end up kind of imploding as a sort of wreck of people who are just sort of just sitting mushy, like with snot hanging out of our noses, crying, waiting for the biggest tsunami coming in to wipe us out, which would probably be a good sign off from Mother Nature, considering the shit we've done. But if we have this thing where we kind of become more resilient, and we're like, yeah, you know what, I don't think the next 10 meals from Swiggy are thing. And you're like, I don't know, the restaurant is not good, I don't like the rating, I'm going to go online and bitch about how bad Amazon's new, what's it called? Not the Fellowship of the Ring, the Rings of Power series is. I think they could have done it better. I think the diversity cast was really shit. I think they should have had more legit characters and stuck to the entire script that Tolkien put out there. If life's too easy, this is your problem. But you think about it, like Saturday night, you're like, oh, here's the thing, you might not come back home, you might not have anything that you've had when you left for the Saturday, which is the obligatory day out. I don't think Amazon's new series or your job is going to matter as much, or your diet, or your activities, or the number of steps you took, or your fitness tracker, or your meal plan, or your whatever it's called, biomarkers, or your longevity decisions. Yeah, maybe it's a thought. Maybe the threat of being eaten by a tiger. I don't know, whatever it is. I don't think we can go to that extreme. I think some people need that extremes. Just need to fucking wake up. But yeah. On that very, very positive note, I have a lovely guest on today's episode. Hey, by the way, let me know what you think about my plan, the morbidity plan, or the Savage Saturdays, or the Sayonara, or that'll be the real weekend warriors, as these people go and call their golf teams or their cycling groups, right? These will be the real warriors. If you can make it onto Sunday, you're a warrior who survived. Otherwise, you're the what's it called? The weekend or the Saturday shrines or the or the Monday morbidity or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, let me know what you think about my plan. Yeah, maybe we can join and start a movement to bring back the woke. That'll be really woke, right? That you wake. You're awake. That's the new hashtag. Awake and alive. All right, let's get to my guest today, Mr. Mathieu Morlighem from, that's an interesting story to start with. Mathieu is originally from France and presently a member of faculty at Dartmouth. I think it's university. I don't think it's Dartmouth University. He's a glaciologist, and today's episode we cover what it is to be a glaciologist. We break the ice, no pun intended. We talk about what he specifically studies, what he's modeling, and what his models will help with future predictions when it comes to climate change, when it comes to increase in temperature, when it comes to the climate models that people can use to help humanity. I don't know why we want to help humanity, but help humanity prepare for a future that looks very dark and which looks very bleak. And we talk about the various kinds of ice that are out there, because clearly it's not just one. And Mathieu studies a certain kind. He'll tell you about it because he's the expert. And just what's in store and how what Mathieu does helps us understand the world as we know it a little better, and how specifically ice and ground ice and other kinds of ice are sort of archives from which we can learn and which we can use to maybe change our ways, which we're never going to do, or maybe prepare for what is to come. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Mr. Mathieu Morlighem, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And thank you for listening as always. I appreciate it. Till the next episode, goodbye, God bless, take care of yourselves. Here's the conversation. Take care. Cheers. Mr. Mathieu Morlighem, I hope I got that right, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Lovely. Are you on summer break right now?
Well, it's summer break, but as you know, for professors in the US, there is no summer break. So summer break is the only time of the year where we can actually get any research done. So we don't teach, but we still work on our research.
So so you're doing research, and of course we'll get into what you study and what you focus on. But so how's the college campus life or university life? Is it back to some semblance of where students are interacting, or because that must be something which is very interesting to adapt for someone like you who's teaching, keeping the social distancing, keeping the mask, and all the various COVID rules that came into place. So how was that experience for you?
Yeah, right. The pandemic has been an interesting experiment for sure. And we've been through all the different flavors where everything was online, then everybody back in the classroom with masks and social distancing. And then now it's, to answer your first question, I would say it's back to normal, even though, I don't know if it will ever be normal anymore, but people are wearing masks if they want to, and we're back in person in the classroom. So it's funny because a couple of years ago, there was this big debate about what universities, what colleges would look like 10, 20, 30 years from now, and whether everything would be online.
Yeah.
And so in a way, COVID-19 was a great experiment to see whether that pans out, that works out, or whether teaching online is not an efficient way to exchange ideas and educate students. And I think we learned a lot. It was not an easy thing for us that have always been taught in the classroom to overnight. I'm really saying overnight. The college told us everything's closed. You have to give your exams online. Yeah. So we had to learn everything on a very short time scale. And we all got better at it. Now, I think if we were to shut down again, we would know what to do without being too nervous about it. But long story short, I think we all realize that teaching online is okay. Like if we can't do anything else, it will do the job. but we lose so many things in terms of interacting with the students, in terms of getting instant feedback with them. Simple things like seeing their faces.
Yeah.
My first day of spring quarter 2020, I asked them if they wanted to turn on their webcam so that we could have some sort of normalcy. And very quickly, they all turned it off. And I'm not the only one. Like, all the professors noticed this. And so
this
we
is just
teach
when
them
the pandemic started, right?
When it started. And it did not get better. If anything, it got worse.
Right.
So, yeah, but I'm very glad that it's back to normal. Don't take me wrong. COVID-19 is still around, and it's still a disease that is harmful. It can do lots of damage. But we have, at this point, we're all vaccinated. We're all tested. I used to be tested every week, as every other professor in Dartmouth.
Yeah.
And if that allows for us to have a normal life, I think that's great.
Did you get a sense? Of course, you have to do what you can to reach out to the students and make sure that you can pass on, the course information and get their feedback and do your role as well as you can. But did you sense a change in, did you have students who went pre-pandemic, came back post-pandemic, and did you sense a change? I mean, you said they switched off their cameras, but any other things, the way they were receiving information, like behavioral changes? Was there a sense of how they approached the course, or did they change it entirely, or did they just there's no point in academics? Was there any sort of observations you made?
I think there is maybe 2 or 3 observations that I made. The first one is, it was so difficult for everybody that we used to give them extensions if they were asking for one. Like it was just the normal thing to be very flexible. And if they don't have time to finish their homework because something is going on, we would just give them 1 week more.
Yeah.
Back on campus, they're like, oh, this is the way we do things. So they're constantly asking for exceptions where now, it's not okay anymore. It's back to normal life.
Yeah.
But for them, college, they just started college fresh from high school. So for them, this was the way things were. And they're having a hard time catching up with the reality that, no, exceptions is really if you have a terrible accident and go to the hospital. Otherwise, you have to submit your work on deadlines. This is how real life works. And so that I noticed. I also noticed some sort of thirst for social interactions. It's been very hard on, they're 18, 19. They need to interact with their peers. And so I could definitely say that it was such a relief when we opened up the classroom again and they could see each other and interact. That's for sure.
Yeah. It's you see it across the ages, right? You see it like even a kid who's 1 or 2 and suddenly now they have this interaction or social anxiety where they can't really meet people or they're scared to meet people. And I feel this is something I'm going to say because, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but there's this sense, I mean, it's more of a question, but also a thought, but you kind of, when you go online, and that's something I'm trying to avoid, especially with social media, is this kind of thing that if you can't do something, then it's the other person's fault. Like, so you said like timelines, people are like, oh, I can't get it done on time, I need an extension, but you have to put your foot down. But do you and your colleagues face backlash if you do that? Or if you're a little strict, like our students, I don't generalize all students, but do you get certain cases where people are like, no, how can you do this? You're insensitive. Because I get this not in university campuses, but across society where people are more easy to say, you know what, I can't do it, you deal with it, you're the bad person, kind of, the attitude. And is that something which is
it happens. It happens, right. But I would say it's the exception rather than the norm.
That's good. Okay.
I think one of the problems is that some professors are still teaching the way, giving extensions all the time and being very flexible even now. And so it gives this uneven landscape where students don't know if if it's okay to ask or if it's not okay to ask. They can always ask, I'll tell them no. But right. But I think it would be better if we were all on the same page.
No, I think it makes sense because you kind of you kind of face the standard, or rather the expectations are set, and then that way it just helps assimilate the entire environment into some sort of level playing field, right? Yeah. No, but it's very interesting because before we started recording, you were telling me about how you got to America and how your parents were some people who liked traveling and exploring various parts of the world, and you moved from France to Africa. And so can you just talk a little bit about how that experience was traveling with your parents? You said first to Ivory Coast and then to Morocco, and how, in some sense, that shaped you with your perspective, or with culturally how you met people growing up, and how that kind of made you into sort of the person who's living in America, and how that is as a person from France to the African continent, now to North America. I know it's quite a long journey. I don't want to sort of take away from that.
Journey.
Yeah, but just as, someone who has seen the world, how is it right now living in a country where there's so much, I wouldn't say intolerance, but there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of polarization when it comes politically or socially. So how do you feel being there? I mean, maybe that's not even a question, but
yeah, it's a great question, and I don't know if I'll be I'll be able to answer it, but I'll try my best.
Yeah.
So living abroad and with a very much multicultural environment. So in schools, in high school, it was very, very multicultural, and that's the way I thought things were. As a kid, when I would go to school, and there would be, black kids, white kids, people that would speak French, people that would speak other languages, and we're all kids and playing together. And I thought this was the experience of every kid around the world. And when I was 15, I decided that I wanted to go back to France just to see how life was there. My parents and I, and my brother and sister, would always go back to France in the summer to see our grandparents and our family. And to me, France was like, it's the holiday country where it's always sunny and we go on vacation. It's the beach and things and the mountains. So I wanted to go back to France over a normal year to see how things were. Mm-hmm. So I went to a boarding school for 3 years during high school. And I realized that my experience as a kid was completely different from other people. And there was, I think it's this lack of tolerance sometimes as to what people are saying or wearing or believe in that really surprised me. Mm-hmm. And I think in a way in the US, so it's also a complicated story how I got from France to the US. It was a bit of an accident, but we can go through that at another point if you would like.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the US, I think we're somewhere in the middle, because the word freedom is so strong here. Sometimes a bit overboard, if you ask me. So I'm thinking about France. There are things you cannot say. You can, for example, you cannot say that Nazis did not exist or didn't kill the Jews. It's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here you can. There's freedom of speech. You can say anything, even if it's ridiculous or may hurt people. You can say it. So that's the extreme part. But there is also, especially where I am right now, freedom of religion, freedom of you can worry what you want. It's okay. You can be the person you want to be.
Yeah.
Of course, there are extremists like anywhere in the world, and I feel like it's not just in the US. Also, in Europe is becoming more and more is closing itself down. In this shell where they want everybody to have the same identity and same beliefs, and I don't think that's healthy.
No, it's happening. Yeah, it's happening in India as well.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, because what you just said, right? There's this idea of freedom, which of course is so important, especially when there are countries whose people don't experience it. But then you have this other sense of, I mean, even the extreme in freedom. I don't know if that's even a concept, but it clearly is manifesting in certain things, right? Like it creates a lot of noise, because the problem is people use political correctness as a tool of freedom, but at the same time they use it as a way to oppress. When they ask people to keep quiet, don't say it. At the same time, you have sensitivity, which is also something which can be misinterpreted with freedom. But it's interesting you mentioned the extreme of freedom, because I was talking to someone on this show a few episodes back, and they said that, and this person, in fact, again, coincidentally, is from I forget which part of Belgium, but he's from Belgium, and he was talking about how the freedom in itself becomes restrictive and becomes almost a lack of freedom in itself. When someone says, I don't want to wear a mask because that's my freedom, you almost abuse that freedom and make it rigid to your own identity. And you become so caught up by that saying, I'm the anti-mask person, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The mask and then vaccination and then all of these other issues, taking antibiotics. We always say, only take them if you really need to, because we're running short on antibiotics. But when it's you're like, oh, well, actually, if I just do it myself, it's not going to harm anybody, but it does, on the large scale. So you're absolutely right. We have this saying in French that says that your freedom stops where other people's freedom starts. And I think it's a good way to say...
That was Rousseau who said that, right? Jean-Jacques Rousseau who said that.
Oh, you may be right. Yeah. I remember hearing... It could be Rousseau.
I mean, it's just common sense, right, Matthew? Like when you think about it, if everyone does their own thing, what happens to the cohesion of a so-called society, right? Like if everyone says, I want to own 30 guns, I want to homeschool my kid. And of course, all these things are human rights, right? But there's this sort of understanding of why we live together. And then, of course, if that's the case, let's just break down society, each person for themselves, each person does what they want, and it becomes crazy out there. But it clearly looks like that's what's happening in America as an outsider. So, I mean, I don't ask you as a person from France or a person who's a professor, but I just want to ask you as a human being living there, because sometimes the media also has an agenda, so you hear the same narrative being repeated. So I always make it a point to ask people, whether it's wherever they may be. I asked another person about what do you feel like, because I think it's important to get the individual experience of a human being in that society, because you have the right to your feelings, but you also have a perspective which, of course, in your case is so global in its perspective. I think it's nice to hear that.
Yeah, I think my experience has, we always talk about, especially now with the January 6th hearings that are going on, where they just finished, I think, last week. Honestly, I've always been close to college campuses, and life is very different from anywhere else in America. And it may be, we may be at the other end of the spectrum, where everybody is very liberal, very pro-choice, very trying to do, we have a lot of, we call them DEI or IDE initiatives for inclusion, diversity, equity. So I have not experienced firsthand here on my day-to-day life
right
people that are extreme. Well, I would be lying if I said never. I used to live in California. I was at UC Irvine, a great school as well. And we would go to the farmers market every Saturday.
Did you study there? Did you do your undergraduate?
No, I was a professor there, and I came to Dartmouth a year ago.
Right. Okay.
And so at the farmers market in the beginning of the pandemic, masks you had to wear one, because we didn't know how it could spread. And there was always one or two families that would not wear masks. And I would try to say something, without attacking them, I didn't want a confrontation, but I just wanted to say, hey, I have young kids, nobody's vaccinated. It would be great if you could wear a mask so that we're all safe.
Yeah.
And instantly we would hear the agenda, from Fox News. Oh, COVID does not exist. This is a thing that people want you to believe in. It's going to stop the economy, but it's not true. And it would go on and on. So I've experienced it, but it's really not the majority at all. It's more the exception.
Right. So no, but it's almost like it's almost like a tantrum, right? People are like, I'm going to enjoy my freedom. Like it feels very weird, because when I told you when I lived in the US, it was for about 3 years, 2003 to 2000 and 2004 to 2007, and the town I lived in was really, really small. The college where I studied was 2,000 students. I think out of that, maybe not even 10% were international students, maybe 5% or something like that, right? So very different experience. But I mean, I did feel, obviously, I'm brown, I'm an Indian, I'm a colored person, and I never, I heard, as you said, I've heard a couple of remarks in gas stations or at 7-Elevens where I've got some, not insults thrown at me, but just, that's a good thing about being visually impaired. You can't really see the looks. You just sort of pretend that everything's fine. But I have a lot of my friends now who are from college, who are back in America now. They're American. They're white, and we got along really well. My roommates were all, like, even when I lived in the UK, were all from England, and they were white, and there was no sort of I didn't make an effort to sort of stand out. I didn't make an effort to only hang out with other Indians. But I feel that's happening now, like with whatever it may be, with whether it's black people or white people or Europeans. You get this sense that everyone's trying to sort of run to their little comfort zone. And so that's the reason I bring it up. I want to ask you what you experience as, of course, a person who's from France, and color-wise, of course, you blend in. But do you sense some sort of you're different when people talk to you?
I think, sadly, because I'm white, even though I have an accent, but if people are like that, like what you're describing, they always make up categories of immigrants. Everybody knows the US is made of immigrants. And so in a way, for them, I'm in the right bucket. They, as Trump said, why aren't we getting more people from Sweden and Norway?
Right.
And so I think that's how people are seeing it. I have not experienced it myself in any type of racism. So, again, at that farmer's market, one day where I was trying to tell people, it would be great if you could wear a mask.
Yeah.
At some point, the discussion got a bit heated, and this person told me, "Oh, go back to your country."
Oh, you got to go back to your country as well.
I got that once. But instantly, like, people that were watching around us got my back, and they wanted me to report it to the police. And I didn't want to make. Yes, I was hurt maybe personally, but I didn't want to make a fuss out of it.
Yeah.
But the people around me were really shocked by what was said. So I think in a way I've been a bit protected because of where I'm coming from. Again, sadly, I wish this was the case for everyone. But living close to campuses, I think, again, the reality is that it's not representative of America generally, and it's a lot more inclusive.
No, absolutely. That's a country which as I said, I haven't spent that much time, but I found it's pretty amazing in what it offers. But at least sitting here many, many thousands of miles away, and I mean, the access to information is increased, but also you need to work that much harder to get access to well-rounded information. Like if you only hear one narrative, then you are bound to kind of believe that everyone's sort of, smoking crack and shooting guns at everyone, right? But that's not the case, clearly. But maybe we should sort of transition to what your experience, because I'm very interested to know how you got into what you are presently studying and teaching, which of course maybe you might do a better job of introducing the topic. But from what I gathered, you are a glaciologist and you study the ice formations on our planet. So how did your time in Africa, at Ivory Coast or Morocco, and then eventually moving I think maybe to America, how did that sort of shape your interest in this field?
Yeah, and it's a great question, because I got into this field by total accident. And so that's something I always tell my students, because they're really worried about not picking the right field or the right major. And I always tell them, opportunities will come and you may seize one that may not be under your radar, and you'll love it. And that's just what happened to me.
Nice.
So growing up, I loved math. I loved physics. That was what I wanted to do. I wasn't really sure what specific field I would be working on, but I knew that math and physics, sciences in general, was what I was interested in.
Okay.
And so in France, we have this weird system where you can wait until the last minute until you decide what sort of major specialization you want to take.
Right.
So all the way to a master's degree, we have a system called Grandes Écoles. You may have heard about it. So it's like engineering schools where you learn everything. You, of course, math and physics and mechanical engineering are the big ones, but you also learn a little bit about biology, about philosophy, a lot of different things. So
sort of
you're
like
not
liberal
a
arts,
special...
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. Dartmouth, in a way, is a little bit like that too, where you pick and choose a bit. You're not an expert in anything, but you know enough so that you can then tackle problems that are complicated because they involve so many different disciplines.
Yeah.
And I really like this approach. It worked for me. And at the end of my engineering school, we had to spend 6 months for an internship abroad. And I wanted to go to the US. I don't know. I was attracted to the country. I thought it would be good to spend 6 months there and see how I liked it. And one of my professors told me, "Oh, I know you're into propulsion and making better engines for airplanes. This is what I was interested in, like fluid mechanics in general.
Right.
I know this person. He's working on the Jet Propulsion Lab, which is a NASA lab. He's an alumnus from our engineering school. You should talk to him and see if he's willing to take on interns." Right. I did not even Google his name. I did not do any research. I went straight to my computer, sent an email saying, "Oh, I'm a student in this school. I'm interested in fluid mechanics and airplane design or this sort of things." And surprisingly, he got back to me because he was not at all this person. He was actually a glaciologist. He was looking at satellite imagery to monitor our ice sheets, so Greenland and Antarctica, and how they're changing in time.
He was not studying. He was not in the field that you thought he was. Okay, that's
right. So I was like, "Whoa, this is." So first, I will forever be thankful that he got back to me. If I receive myself an email today like that, I don't know if I would reply.
Yeah.
So there is this minimum background research that you expect.
Yeah.
So he said, "This is not the field I'm in, but I'm looking for people to design a new ice sheet model. So it's a computer model to help us understand what's happening and make better predictions about what may happen in the future." Mm-hmm. And so I took a week to think about it because I was like, environmental engineering or, working on the environment is not something I was necessarily interested in. Well, I didn't think about it.
Yeah.
And slowly, I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. Let's work on it for 6 months and we'll see how it goes. So I went to Pasadena, to Southern California. I worked on this for 6 months, which became a PhD, and then I've been working on this field ever since.
That's it's funny you mentioned that because I remember once when I was staying with my cousin in Boston. So I just finished my college undergrad, and I'd graduated with sociology and a little bit of a minor in political science, and I was looking at applying for jobs, etc. And I wasn't, let me be honest, I wasn't a good student. I didn't have good grades, but as you said, it's one of those things where you just want to try everything and you never know what comes your way, right? I'm a stand-up comedian now, so I didn't do anything related to political science in that way. But I remember sitting there and she's like, "Why don't you talk to a couple of departments and just call up people? What do you lose, right?" So I wanted to see if public health is something that I can go down. So I remember taking the number on, I think it was online, and I called up the public health department, and it turned out to be at Harvard. And the person who answered, I'm like, "I want to understand what it involves to get into a program in public health." And it turned out to be the dean of public health. And she's like, "You probably want to do a little more research before calling me."
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, no, it was embarrassing at the point, but it's exactly, it didn't work out for me. I'm not doing public health, fortunately, but that lady must have been like, "Where do people get my number from?"
Yeah.
No, but I find it, I'll be honest with you, I don't know too much about the idea of modeling, computer models, but I remember reading that at the global summit, the climate summit they had in Scotland, I think recently, sometime this year, they had this display which was, is it something to do with the Antarctic ice sheet that they took a capture thing? Do you remember reading about this?
So I don't remember exactly what specifically you're talking about, but
it was an installation at the conference, the climate conference they had in Scotland, right? I think that was earlier this year.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
So apparently they had this kind of installation which was made out, which was actually not made out, but it was the actual ice they got from Antarctica, and it showed the layers over the years.
It was an ice core? Okay, I didn't hear
Yeah,
about
something
this.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so ice cores are... I can tell you a bit more about ice cores because it's really amazing how much we've learned from them.
I want to go down that because this basically, this sample, and they made, I think they had an available sample of water that people could taste pre-industrial revolution. Something like that, yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. So
no, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
so can you talk about that, please? Yeah.
Ice cores is a I would say still new field in environmental sciences. People have gone to Greenland for decades, almost a century, especially Greenland, and we've always taken samples to monitor like chemicals and things like that. And apparently, I don't know if it's a legend or if it's true, but there was a team of French scientists that went to Antarctica And after a long day of hard work, they wanted a glass of whiskey. And they were like, okay, let's put some ice in it. And so they put some ice from the cores they were just drilling. And one of the scientists looked at the glass and saw that there were little bubbles, very, very tiny bubbles in the ice cubes. And these, the air would come out and go up to the surface of their whiskey. And he realized that what's in this bubble was actually a piece of the atmosphere as it was when it got trapped in the ice.
Whoa,
and so it was like,
awesome.
Wouldn't it be amazing if we could extract air from these bubbles at different depths and determine what the concentration of CO2 was, and other concentrations of chemicals. And that's how we saw that CO2 has never been as high as it is today, over the past 100,000 years, 300,000 years.
That's like time travel almost, right?
Oh, it's totally time travel. And it's a perfect, pristine sample that has never been touched by anything.
I mean, that just sounds like, wow, it's almost like magic, right? You're sitting there. And I mean, of course, it has to happen over a scotch, right? Because, I mean, the best ideas have happened over a scotch.
Right.
But so what does that feel like? I mean, that revelation when you're sitting there with something you take for granted, like, oh, it's an ice cube or it's an ice core or ice sample. And it's almost like, in Jurassic Park when they look at that amber and there's a fly in it and you're like, that thing is carrying a DNA of a species which is wiped out. I mean, it's obviously maybe exaggerated in the movie, but that's exactly what you're working with, right?
Yeah, so I'm not myself working on ice cores. I use ice core data a lot to reconstruct the past.
Okay.
But it has really revolutionized, especially atmospheric chemistry science. So people that are trying to understand how the atmosphere was hundreds, thousands of years ago, and trying to understand the cycles. The Earth is made of, because we call it a closed system, which means that not much comes in, not much comes out, and everything cycles through the system, like the water cycle. You have water in the clouds, and then it rains, it goes into rivers, or into the ground, and then it goes into the ocean, and then it goes and continues like that. We have that for every atom you can think of. We have the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. So knowing what the atmosphere looked like helps us understand these cycles and how they respond to changes in the Earth's orbit. If there is an asteroid hitting the Earth, we get an idea of how things evolve. And it's very much important to look at the past in order to make sure that our models, the ones that are, for example, the ones that I'm developing myself, if we can reproduce the past, then we have more, we can trust the models going forward. We know they're doing the right thing.
Sometimes they say we study history so we make sure it doesn't repeat itself in some context. And this sounds a bit like that, right? So we know enough about the past cycles so we know what to expect. And say a scenario, if this happens, we know what might happen, right? But with something as ancient as the planet, like I remember reading that the Antarctic region was a tropical climate where dinosaurs lived many million years ago. And now we know what the carbon footprint can do with the ecosystem, how long it lasts in our oceans, in our atmosphere, and what it can do. Why are we so, or maybe not why are we so, but are we in some way through these models, through this information, through this understanding, trying to control climate? Would you say that's something we're trying to achieve?
So what I can say is, yes, the Earth has always been changing, and it's funny because when you talk about climate change, the first thing people that are a bit climate skeptic would say, "Oh, the climate has always been changing," and this is true. This is totally true, as you said. Antarctica didn't have ice hundreds of millions of years ago, and continents have been shifting, and the concentration of CO2 has been changing. But today, what we're seeing is that the Earth's climate is changing not because of natural cycles. It's changing because of our carbon footprint. And it has never changed as quickly as we are seeing today. If we look at the past record, we've seen changes in sea level, in temperatures. What we're seeing today is way beyond the natural cycles, and we don't know how different species are going to adapt to the new normal.
So your what you just said, of course, is yes. I mean, it's totally caused by human activities, right? Whether it's fossil fuel, etc. But so you're talking about the consequences. Are a lot of the studies which are being conducted presently, is it about what will happen to human beings or what will happen to other species? Because sometimes it almost feels that a lot of our studies, I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of it is very human-centric.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's human nature. We care about us first. So getting the message to the public that if we continue on this path of fossil fuel carbon emissions, your house on the shore will be wiped out. And they're much more sensitive to this than we say, oh, praying mantis will disappear from the face of the earth. And it's just human nature, sadly. But so there are different fields, but these fields are always looking at what's happening to the earth as a system. What is going to be the future of precipitations, the future of temperatures, extreme events. So we're all using the same data, but apply it to different subfields. But yes, everybody's going to be affected. People and animals and insects, and it's already happening.
It's already happening, yeah. No, so you talk about this ice formations and the ice melts, and you talk about glaciers, and you talk about how they form into icebergs, and you have the ice stream. And you put it in a really nice way. So maybe can we just talk about that before we get into what exactly your models are looking to achieve and what they're looking to forecast?
Yeah, of course. So ice on Earth is called the cryosphere. So cryo is for what's very cold. And in the cryosphere, there is different types of ice. So some that I study, some that I don't study. So I can tell you briefly about what I don't study is ice in the form of permafrost. So it's permanently frozen ground, which sadly, again today, with the rise of temperatures, is thawing with all sorts of consequences. It's been trapping a lot of organic material, so it's releasing tons and tons of carbon, CO2 and methane into the atmosphere. So I don't study that.
And also, that's also where they're finding. That's why they're finding a lot of these mammoth and a lot of old. Even isn't that where they found in Siberia the Denistone? I forget what's
Siberia has lots of permafrost. Alaska also has permafrost. It's close to the poles and in mountain regions where it's high enough that the temperature. So to get permafrost, you need to be in a region that's permanently frozen, so below 0 degrees year round. That's the definition of permafrost.
And that's melting.
So in very cold regions.
And we're losing that now, right?
We're losing, yes, and it's also very difficult to determine how much carbon there is in these reservoirs, but we think there is twice as much carbon as there is in the atmosphere today. So if everything thaws, we triple our CO2 concentration. So
without any more production from our end, but just from what's trapped in those layers.
We're releasing what's being stored in that reservoir. And there is not just that, it's also, diseases and viruses that have been trapped that we have not been exposed to that are there. And that's also something people are worried about. So
it's like an old refrigerator, an old freezer, which no one's touched, and suddenly it's like, what's in there? Let's figure it out.
It's exactly that. So yeah, bacteria that we, haven't been around that may be released and do some damage to us. There is another part of the cryosphere that I don't study. It's sea ice. So sea ice, especially when we talk about the Arctic, Arctic is made of sea ice. So it's ocean water. When it's cold enough again, ocean is salty, so it doesn't freeze at 0 degrees. It freezes at minus 2.3, I believe, and it's going to form a shell of ice at the top. It's pretty thin ice. It's a few tens of centimeters. It can reach 4 or 5 meters, but it's pretty thin.
Right.
And it does not contribute to sea level rise because it's floating. If you take a big glass of Coke and you put a lot of ice in it that comes out of the glass, if it melts, your Coke is going to be at the exact same level. Right? So ice that's floating does not contribute to sea level. So I'm lying a little bit because sea ice has an indirect link or is an indirect control on sea level because it's so white. It's a very reflective surface. So a lot of the sun radiation that we get from the sun is radiated away, is reflected away, and doesn't warm the earth. If sea ice disappears, then instead of having that nice white reflective surface, we have the dark ocean water that is going to absorb a lot of this incoming radiation. Rising temperatures.
So contrary to what people think, because it's in contact with water, it doesn't melt, but it's doing the opposite, which is it's not reflecting enough sunlight out back, so it's warming up even more from underneath, kind of thing.
So I'm not sure I followed your your reasoning, but if there is sea ice,
yeah, it's more of a reflector.
It's more of a reflector, and so as we increase temperatures, it's what we call a positive feedback. Positive is not a positive thing; it just means that it's amplifying. So if we increase the temperatures, we have less sea ice, we absorb even more radiation from the sun, the temperature further increases, and this goes on and on.
And that in turn melts more of the sea ice. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So sea ice is fascinating. Of course.
No, it's before we get into what you focus on, or maybe it's something which you can cover when you talk about what you study. Isn't these ice, these sources of ice, whether it's sea ice or, because I don't know again if this is true or not, but I heard that people are harvesting fresh water from glaciers and they're moving them to places to use, especially places which don't have water, like I think the Middle East, etc. Is that true, or is it just like a fantasy where I read somewhere which is inaccurate?
People are considering it. No, it's so it would not be sea ice. Sea ice is it rejects salt when it forms, but it's still a bit salty, especially first year ice. So you would not drink sea ice.
Okay.
You would drink land ice, which is what I study. And
right.
Well, I can tell you a bit more. I'll go back to your question at that point. So land ice.
Let's go into
is formed by the slow transformation of snow into ice. So it's year after year, you have layers of snow, and not all of it is going to melt every summer. Yeah, a little bit is going to melt, but not all of it. So it accumulates, and at some point, the weight is so strong that it's going to get compressed and form solid ice that will then deform under its own weight, like a very viscous fluid, like honey a little bit.
Yeah.
And so this ice is going to flow slowly towards the coast and form icebergs. And yes, people are thinking about taking icebergs and pulling them with some sort of big ship and taking them to the Gulf or somewhere where they don't have enough water. But the carbon footprint involved with these things is crazy. So
storing
not
something that
I recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah, icebergs can be very big. So that's also a misconception maybe in the media. When we talk about climate change, people show you pictures of icebergs formation, a calving event, what we call. This has always been happening, and it's part of the cycle. You have snow coming in that adds ice to our ice sheets. This ice has to go somewhere. So it melts a little bit at the surface, it melts a little bit once it touches the ocean, but it also breaks chunks of ice that are called icebergs. Now what we're seeing today is we have way more icebergs than we used to have. So our ice sheets are retreating inland, which is not good. But generating icebergs in itself without any context, very healthy glaciers have icebergs. So it's a normal thing. The iceberg that sank the Titanic came from Greenland. It was in 1912. At this point, the ice sheet was more or less in steady state.
Right. No, so these things, you're right. I mean, in the sense that it makes sense, like something so heavy has to break off because it can't handle its own weight. And you said these are land-based snowfalls that over time compress temperature, pressure, all these forces play. But why is it such a bad thing? Like, you mentioned the reflective surface of sea ice, but is it something which we can survive if the land ice retreats at such a level?
So albedo is one thing. The big impact we're looking at is sea level rise. Because as I said, if sea ice melts, that doesn't change sea level, but if land ice that's currently on bedrock, so it's above sea level, if that melts, that water is going to flow to the ocean, and it's already happening now. So if we look at mountain glaciers, so all the mountain glaciers in the world, in the Himalayas, in the Andes, in the Alps, it would raise sea level by about 26 centimeters. If Greenland, the Greenland ice sheet that's between Europe and America were to melt, sea level would rise by more than 7 meters.
Wow.
And if Antarctica were to melt, it would raise sea level by 58 meters. So there is a huge potential out there for raising sea level beyond what we could adapt to, potentially quickly. So sea level rise is the big impact of what's happening now in terms of for these glaciers.
And would that impact our access to drinking water as well? Because everything would then be mixed with salt?
Yeah, sea level rise comes with all sorts of issues. Of course, we're thinking the first thing that comes to mind is destruction of property and things like that. But yes, we also have salt water contamination, because as this water rises, it may sip into groundwater, and so your well that may have fresh water may be contaminated with salt, and you cannot use it anymore.
Oof, all sounds nice and rosy.
Right. And sometimes people ask me, how is it to work in this field? Because it's just so dark and depressing.
Yeah.
And yes and no, because we can also run. So what I do is I build these physical models based on what we see and the physics that we understand. And I go forward in time, and we can see how our actions now can have a huge influence on what our future looks like. So I'm not going to lie, sea level is going to continue to rise, and there's going to be dramatic consequences. But we still have full control on how bad it's going to be. So in a way, even though the future doesn't look very bright, we still have control.
So let's paint a picture here, right? Hypothetically, like we stop burning fossil fuels, we come up with some miraculous solution. Say everything is running on hopes and dreams, right? And there's absolutely no carbon emissions. We're not there's no deforestation because we don't want to burn wood. We're not using any of these things which have things. Solar and wind is magically not harming any of the species. Of course, it's a bit of a silly scenario, but can we say reverse the retreating ice and then make it a positive growth of ice and sort of cover more of the thing than the reflective? So say that happens, and then there's more land ice, there's more sunlight being reflected, the temperatures drop. Can that happen even, or is that even possible?
So I hate to be the bringer of bad news, but it's not going to happen.
Right.
The ice sheets and other parts of the climate system are pretty slow to respond. So they're shrinking today because they're adapting to the new temperatures. And even if we stop burning fossil fuel today, it will still take centuries for them to adjust to this new climate. So they're going to continue to retreat. But of course, if we stop burning fossil fuel today, they would not retreat as much as what they would do if we were to continue on this path. And speaking of which, there is also a misconception sometimes from students and from the public about our reducing fossil fuel. So if we stop burning fossil fuel today, our concentration of carbon will stay where it's at today.
Yeah.
So 406 ppm or something like that. In order to go back to where it was, pre-industrial, we need to take carbon from the atmosphere and take it out. So we need to have some sort of carbon sinks. And maybe if we manage to get to a concentration of carbon that the world was at 200 years ago, we may be able to reverse and go back to what the Earth looked like at that point. Right. But reducing fossil fuel is great, but we're still going in the wall. We're still increasing the amount of carbon. In order for the Earth to stop changing, we need zero emission.
It almost sounds like we need one giant sort of carbon vacuum cleaner that just sucks out everything and puts it somewhere else, right?
That's the dream. And I think it's something I've noticed here in America. People are aware about this. And, faculty, like scientists, they know it's happening, but people believe in technology.
Yeah.
And my sense, I think Europe is on the other end of the spectrum, where technology may help us, but we all need to do something now because it's going to take too long. And somehow the truth may be somewhere in the middle. I'm a European, so I'm more on that end.
Yeah.
I think if we all do something, and it doesn't need to be a religion. I think it's also, in a way, we say stop eating meat.
Yeah,
and that would be awesome. Don't take me wrong. In terms of climate, if everybody stops eating meat, it would really help us. But nobody wants to do it. But if you say, let's cut down, let's eat beef once a week tops, everybody can do that, and it doesn't hurt.
But that's again where that thing of freedom comes up, right? One person will be like, "No, you're violating my right to eat what I want," and it becomes again
exactly the same.
The noise.
It doesn't need to be a law. I think when it comes down to changing your lifestyle to help the planet, it could be a law, but it doesn't have to be. I think it's better if everybody understands what's at stake and everybody takes the steps that need to be taken.
It's almost like someone comes and tells you, hey, you know what? If you eat beef or whatever you eat, meat every day, the house you live in is going to get filled with water. People are like, nah, it's almost, that is a reality, because it's the home that we collectively share, which is this planet. And we kind of seem to be so, sort of blind when it comes to that. We're like, no, I'm not the culprit over here. It's very silly thing. But before we wind up, Matthew, I maybe you can just briefly talk about the model that you're working on.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
So you, I couldn't hear you for like 3 seconds, but I think.
Oh no, sorry. I think my connection dropped. I just basically wanted to ask you the model that you've created with what the intention behind that is and what it sort of serves.
Yeah, of course. So the model I'm developing is called the Ice Sheet and Sea Level System Model. So it's called ISSM, and all the models of the Earth system are based on the same principles as models that you use to make dams or to model the ocean or big structure. It's always based on simple conservation laws. And
right.
So the conservation laws may be conservation of mass. If you add a kilogram of snow in your ice, then you have 1 kilogram more that's going to go somewhere, and then you track down this mass. So it's conservation of mass, conservation of energy. So if you add a flux of heat, a heat flux at the surface of the ice, again, is going to go down and change the temperature of your ice. And then the last one is conservation of momentum.
Right.
So if the ice is flowing fast, or if it deforms, it's going to change its viscosity and flow faster, and so it has all sorts of things. But the equations, to say a word that I don't want to use, but the equations are very much known. It's physics from 200 years ago, and
right.
We apply it to many different structures. The only difference is how ice deforms. So the way concrete deforms is not the same way as water or as ice. So that's the slight difference we make. But the equations themselves, the math, is established and works.
Okay.
So as long as we know how ice deforms under stress, and we know that from lab experiments, we go in the field and measure all sorts of things, we put that into this system of equations, and now we can determine for a given state what the ice looks like, what its temperature is, what its ice velocity is. So ice flow is primarily what I'm interested in. So how fast is the ice flowing from the interior to the ocean? Because if this flow increases, if ice is flowing faster, we're going to put more icebergs into the ocean, and sea level is going to rise faster. So yeah, it's based on simple physics. In order for the models to run forward, we also need to know what our climate is going to look like. So we need to know what the atmosphere is going to do. We need to know, how hot it's going to be at the surface, how much snow we're going to get, because that's what's feeding the ice. If it stops snowing, we're in trouble. There are some places where we expect to get more snowfall, actually, because if in a warmer world, you can put more moisture into the atmosphere. And so that's why we think we're going to get more extreme events, more wet places will get wetter. So we expect some parts of the ice sheets to get more snow, which is good news in terms of keeping it in balance. But some places will get more melt, and it may not look good. So atmosphere is one. The ocean is also a big one. What the ocean is doing is critical, because what we've seen over the past decade or so is that we have intrusion of warm water that's at depth. This warm water has always been there. It has been around Antarctica, for as long as we know.
Yeah.
But it used to stay away. With
climate
change, we have a change in wind patterns. We have changes in forces at the surface, and this warm water can now reach the glaciers and melt it from below, from where we have extensions that are floating. If you melt the ice, the floating extensions, the ice upstream is going to flow even faster and discharge even more ice into the ocean. So what the ocean is doing is absolutely critical.
So it's kind of multiple forces at play, right?
That's what we call it, the climate system. It's really a system of interacting pieces.
Yeah, it's almost like there's one being fed in, there's one being sort of leaked out, but there's so many elements that are kind of working simultaneously. Now, and it's crazy that experiences are, we kind of take it like, oh, it's crazy, we had extra, because I live in a place which is about 3,500 feet above sea level, And we do, of course, we don't experience the monsoon in its full force like coastal places like Goa, Mumbai, or places on the coast. But right now, as we speak, it's cold. Like where I live in Bangalore, it's winters get to about maybe in the night at like 1 a.m. like 11 degrees Celsius. But now sitting in August, we hit like 18 or 19 degrees already, and it's raining continuously for a week. It's almost like and of course because of bad construction and overpopulation and bad city planning, we're already getting a lot of flooding in the city. And simultaneously, when you hear of that, fires happening across Europe, it's just like, whoa, it's so real, right?
Yeah, I think we're starting to experience it ourselves, and in a way, sadly, it's a good thing, because before it was like, oh yeah, scientists come up with this crazy idea, but I'm still getting snow in the winter and can still go to the beach in the summer, and now like, well, yes, wildfires have always been happening in California. They've always been part of the the weather almost, but now we're seeing the frequency and intensity is clearly beyond what we've experienced. And that's the problem with climate change. Is everything is possible. It's always possible to get a very hot summer. It was possible 100 years ago, and it's possible today. But we're increasing the likelihood of that to happen. So when there is
people aren't going to be able to go for a summer break when the temperatures got up to 42 degrees, 45 degrees, when it was earlier 35, maybe with the freak summer of 39, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and there's places where you used to go in your childhood that are not going to be, so good to go to a few years from now. But that's also why, every time there is an extreme event, the journalists talk to us and say, "Is this due to climate change?" And we cannot say yes or no, because it was possible, but it was unlikely in the past. The fact that we're seeing more and more of them is probably climate change, but we need to have enough record. We need to have 10 years of data in order to say, look, this is way beyond the scope of what we used to have.
Yeah, I think it's a tough place, but I mean, they put you on the spot, right? Because if you don't give them the answer they want to hear, then it's
they want
like,
to hear climate change. Absolutely,
they want to hear climate change. It's amazing the work you're doing, Mathieu. And before we wind up, I want to ask you. I don't know if it's the right question, but is there something in that ice, the ancient layers of the ice cores and the land ice? Is there a little hidden secret that can save humanity from itself?
It's a good question. I wish there was one, but what we're discovering is that our models are generally too conservative. So if anything, our projections, what we think the world's going to look like, is probably on the lower end of what we're actually going to see, because there are still things we don't understand. What's happening at the ice and rock interface. How much friction we have, all of that is hard to know. So we come up with best guesses that are probably conservative. So I think there is hope. I think we shouldn't lose hope, because it's all what's happening is because of us. And so we got there, and so we have, if we want to, if we have the will to do that, to take this seriously, we can stop it. We can stop it now, but it's going to take all of us, and not just one country.
Well, I'm so glad that you are doing what you're doing, and you're helping generations to come, teaching them, passing on the knowledge, spreading the information, and making forecasts that can hopefully help us and open people's eyes and open people's ears. So, Mathieu, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your story, and joining me on the episode today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great.
My pleasure. Thanks.